Wat maak je nog? Kijk je niet TV? Ja. En ga je school?
Papa, my school is new.
Your Worship, in front of the court, case number A985 of 16, State versus Willem Kobus Kukumu, accused in person. Accused number 2, Louisa Cornelia Susanna Kukumu, accused number 2, represented by Mr. Nell.
Hi everyone, welcome to or welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me here again today. Now for today's case, we are going to talk about a subscriber suggested case. So thank you for all your suggestions. Keep them coming because a lot of you have suggestions that I've never heard about or that I've completely forgotten about. So please keep them coming and thank you very much. But just in case you missed it, last week we spoke about the South African Bonnie and Clyde, who were Charmaine and Peter, and how they terrorized South Africa for 17 days straight. If you haven't seen that, I will link it up here for you. But like I said, today we are talking about a subscriber suggested case, and today we are covering the Poppie van der Merwe case. And I do just want to give a warning before we get into this case that it is quite graphic and quite difficult to listen to, so please just keep that in mind when watching this video. But with that being said and enough rambling from me, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
So Poppie van der Merwe was born on the 9th of August 2013. But before we get into the details of Poppie van der Merwe, I do just want to start right from the beginning and let's talk about Poppie's mom, Louisa. Louisa, Poppie's mom, was born in 1974 in a small town in the Eastern Cape, and Louisa had an absolutely horrendous childhood. Her father passed away when she was 10 years old, and it was just her and her mom. Her mom did end up marrying quite quickly after her father had passed away, and her stepfather was not exactly the greatest role model ever. Louisa would later say that her stepfather was incredibly abusive, physically, emotionally, and sexually. Louisa did struggle in school as a teenager. But once she left school, she managed to pick herself up and leave the small town in the Eastern Cape. And she actually ended up getting married to a man named Freddie Els. But sadly, just like her stepfather the years before, apparently Freddie wasn't that great to Louisa either, and he would physically and emotionally abuse her as well. Eventually, Freddie and Louisa did end up separating, but before they separated, they did have 2 children together, and their firstborn was called Maralise, and their youngest was called Jaco. Then shortly after her divorce was finalized from Freddie, Louisa ended up meeting another man, and this man's name was Johan Christoffel van der Merwe, but he preferred to go by the name of Christo, so that's what we will call him. And Christo worked as a diesel mechanic, and soon after they met, they absolutely fell in love with each other. It was an incredible whirlwind relationship. Christo and Louisa moved in kind of a couple months after they first met, and as I mentioned earlier, on the 9th of August 2013, Louisa Cornelia Susanna van der Merwe was born, affectionately known as Poppie van der Merwe. And in Afrikaans, the word Poppie means doll, and that's what a lot of people thought that young Louisa looked like, and that's why they just call her Poppie. So Louisa, also known as Poppie, was named after her mom Louisa. So there's 2 Louisas in the stories. So just to make it easy, I'm going to call Louisa the baby Poppie throughout this entire story, as that's what she was affectionately known as. And I'm going to keep Louisa Louisa. But anyway, so as quickly as the relationship with Christo and Louisa started was as quickly as it ended, and it was an incredibly rocky and very messy breakup, and she eventually took out a protection order for her and her 3 children. With this protection order, it only allowed him to see Poppie every second Sunday of the month. Christo and Louisa then separated, and Louisa then moved to Oranje to be with her mom Susan. So Louisa's mother lived in Oranje, and Louisa wanted to be with her mom in order just to try and get back on her feet and to try and start afresh and just start anew. And of course, we have to kind of address the elephant in the room. If you are South African, you know exactly what Oranje is or where the place is. And if you are not South African, Oranje is basically a whites-only town, and it's completely autonomous. They do everything themselves in there. They have their own currency, they have their own doctors and schools, and I think it's fenced off. I've never been there, but it's basically its own town. In the little like brochure or indicating what Oranje is, they say that they are not technically a whites only, but they are an Afrikaans only town. And their mission statement doesn't exactly say that there are no people of color allowed in the town, but I mean, but basically Oranje is where Louisa and Suzanne live now with her 3 children. So in Oranje, Louisa had to find a job. She couldn't just sit there, and they did come in quite poor, so they had to try and make their own way. A lot of the people in the community did try and help Louisa and her children with like food and blankets and clothes, but otherwise she had to try and fend for herself as well. So Louisa did end up becoming a cashier in an OK store inside Oranje. And while Louisa was working at this OK store, she met a man named Kobus Kokemoer. Kobus grew up in Pretoria. He also went to Pretoria University, where he then got a diploma in electrical works. So he was then qualified to be an electrician. But Kobus wasn't really feeling the whole electrician kind of work, and he then enrolled in the army, where he then became a chef, and that was really where his passion lied. But one thing led to another, and he was let go from the army. So Kobus then moved to Oranje to try and find more work, or to try and build himself up, just as Louisa had tried to do as well. So then in September of 2015, Louisa and Kobus moved into Kobus's flat, and that's where they lived with the 3 children. And I do just want to talk about Marlies, who is Louisa's oldest daughter. And remember, Jaco is Marlies's younger brother, and then Poppie's the baby. So Marlies was around 14 years old when Kobus and Louisa moved in together. And Marlies would basically do everything. She would make sure the children are fed, clothed, loved, cuddled, and she would just give all the love to the children and just basically be their mother. And Poppie would actually call Marlies Ma or mom, because that's the only type of love and warm figure that she knew. So then the next part is important, because in November of 2015, so around 2 months after Kobus and Louisa moved in together, they then got married. And the day after they got married, they asked Marlies to move out, to absolutely leave. They were like, you're old enough, you're 14 years old, you can fend for yourself, get out of the house, and we don't really care what happens to you. So Marlies was forced to leave. Kobus kind of stood at the door, and he basically pushed her out of the house. She then moved back in with her dad, who moved back to the Eastern Cape. So Marlies and Freddie were living in the Eastern Cape, far away from Poppie and Jaco, her younger siblings. Now, Louisa and Kobus were absolutely ruthless with how they ran their house. Kobus ran the house with an absolute iron fist, and Louisa was not any different or any better. There were reports that the way they would discipline Poppie and Jaco was that they would kick them, hit them, bite them, throw them against any object that they could. So if Poppie was busy lying on the bed, or Jaco, they would pick them up and they would throw them against the wall, or they would throw them against something hard. And Poppie was only around 2 to 3 years old at the time, and Jaco must have been about 5 or 6 at the max. Louisa would also sometimes withhold food, and while this was all going down in the Kokemoer household, a man had moved in next to Kobus. So a couple months after Kobus and Louisa had gotten married, and this incredibly horrific environment that the children were in was all going down under this house, a new neighbor had now moved in, and he would say that he could hear Poppie screaming and crying all the time. He could hear Kobus shouting at her all the time. And in early 2016, the neighbor said that he heard Poppie screaming, and then all of a sudden the next day, this neighbor now saw Poppie being brought back into the house with a cast over her leg. The neighbor was absolutely shocked, and he walked up to Kobus and was like, what the hell happened here? Why has she got a cast over her leg? Kobus then got so angry, he shouted at the neighbor, and he was like, mind your own business. And Louisa then came and she tried to calm everything down, and she was like, oh no, Poppie just fell down the stairs. So the neighbor was like, sure buddy, and he then walked to the police station, and he reported every single incident that he saw or heard. So he reported the shouting, he reported the screaming all the time, he also reported now her broken leg. And I do just want to report that not a single police officer did anything based on the reports from this neighbor for months. And the police in Oranje thought, it's kind of a domestic dispute, we don't exactly want to get involved, and they just left this poor child or children to fend for themselves, and they wouldn't take the neighbors' reports seriously at all. And just as a side note and a by the way kind of information, Kobus, Louisa, Jaco, and Poppie all share the same bed, and being adults and being married, Cobus and Louisa would still be intimate and they would still have their time together, but they would do it in the bed with Xoxo and Poppie still there, sometimes still awake, and they wouldn't really give any regard for their children or what their children would see. But eventually, after months and months of this neighbor reporting so many incidents to the police, they did end up sending a social worker over to the Kokomoor house, and the social worker came, they interviewed Louisa and Cobus, and as soon as the social worker left, Cobus, Xoxo, Louisa and Poppie were all gone in the middle of the night, and their neighbor never ever saw the four of them again. The four of them then left Oranje in the middle of the night in September of 2016 to a place a couple of hours outside of Brits. So now that the Kokomoors had no one watching, it was quiet, there was nothing that anyone could do or say or eavesdrop on, the amount of punishment and abuse that went on in this house got so much worse. And only a month after they had moved out from Oranje to Brits on the 25th of October 2016, a distressed and very panicked Louisa and Cobus rock up speeding to the entrance of the Brits communal hospital with baby Poppie in their arms. A paramedic who was just about to leave the hospital kind of intercepted Louisa and Cobus. He then saw the lifeless body of Poppie. He then picks Poppie up and he tries to resuscitate her. But as this paramedic is trying to resuscitate her, he notices that she's already long gone. He can't get her mouth open and she's absolutely stiff. And he notices now that rigor mortis has fully set in. So that means that she had been dead for a long time before they brought her to the hospital. Now, while the paramedic is busy trying to resuscitate or trying to figure out what's happening to Poppie, the medical doctor or the emergency doctor that was on duty at the time, he comes running out, he looks at Poppie, and the paramedic and him kind of give each other a look. So they then take her into a surgical unit or to kind of like a private area away from the parents and away from everybody else so that they could try and see if they could save her or what was really going on. And when the emergency doctor took one look at Poppie's body, he noticed that she had bruises everywhere. And I mean everywhere. From her head to her toes, even in her private area. And when the doctor saw this, he had to leave the private area, go into the nurse's area where the phones are, and he then ended up calling the police. Cobus Kokomoor overheard this and he was absolutely furious with the doctor. He's like, why are you getting the police involved? This is none of their business. Just try and save Poppie, basically. The doctor refused to listen to Cobus and he ended up calling the police anyway. Cobus was actually threatening the doctor and right in front of everybody else. When the police did arrive on scene, they immediately separated Cobus and Louisa from Poppie and they started asking them questions. And I guess the only excuse or reason that they could give for the state of Poppie's body, they said that she was busy watching TV and then all of a sudden she collapsed and they quickly grabbed her. They then put her in the bakkie and apparently Louisa was holding her, and because they were driving so recklessly and roughly, she was busy bouncing around and that's how she got all of her bruises all over her body. Now if we pause for just a second, I do understand that some vehicles can be incredibly bumpy and there can be one hell of a bumpy ride to wherever you're going. However, one, I do hope that Louisa was actually holding Poppie when they were driving to the hospital. Two, I hope that the amount of bruising on Poppie's body wasn't coming from her being thrown in the back of the bakkie and she alone was busy bouncing everywhere and that's where she got her bruises. And three, this whole situation doesn't really make sense from the beginning. Because firstly, bruises, as far as I know, I'm sure we've all had a bruise once in our life. The bruises start to change color as they become older, and you can kind of see the difference between a fresh bruise versus an older bruise. And I'm 100% sure the doctors know a difference between a fresh one and an old one. And Poppie's body was just riddled in bruises, and I don't think from a drive from a suburb near the hospital you would get so many dark bruises so quickly. But I'm not a doctor, I could be wrong with that, but you kind of get where I'm going with this. Police took Louisa and Cobus into custody, and as soon as they were in custody, the two of them started singing like canaries. They were spilling the beans on each other and they started throwing each other under the bus. And basically the story is such a mess because there's so much he said, she said. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell a side from Louisa's side and then we're going to tell the side from Cobus's side. And maybe we'll meet somewhere in the middle where there's some truth to this. But I think because there's such different stories from Cobus and Louisa, we will never really get to the truth of what happened to Poppie on that fateful October day. So let's start with Mommy Louisa herself. So Louisa said that on the 25th of October 2016, Poppie was busy lying on a little mattress in front of the TV, drifting off, coming back awake, and just kind of relaxing in front of the TV. All of a sudden, Cobus bursts into the front door. He's in an absolute absolutely foul mood, and he had just come from the shopping center where he had shopping in the car. So he's now burst through the door. He then points at Louisa and he's like, hey, go fetch the shopping, bring it inside, bring me something to drink. And he then rages in the house. Louisa quickly runs through the front door. She goes to fetch the shopping. When she comes back inside, she sees that Poppie's no longer in front of the TV. She then asks Quibus what happened, where's Poppie? And he said, oh no, she's playing dead in the bathroom again. Louisa then runs to the bathroom. She sees Poppie lying on her stomach. She then turns Poppie over and she sees that she has really blue lips. And I mean, that's a clear indication that this child is not playing. Louisa then tried to resuscitate Poppie, but it was too late, and that's how apparently they then went to the hospital. But now let's get into Quibus's story. So Quibus said that it wasn't him that it was in a foul mood, it was apparently Louisa that was absolutely pissy the entire day. And he said that Louisa was pissy because Poppie was being potty trained and she had apparently messed herself, and Louisa was so angry that Poppie couldn't get this right. And I mean, she's only 3 years old, she's a child, she's been terrified her entire life, and now you're trying to force her to do something that takes time and she's not getting it right, and you keep shouting and screaming at her. Of course she's not going to get it right. So basically Louisa leaves Poppie drenched in her urine, and then she makes breakfast for everybody in the house. Louisa then tells Poppie to come fetch her breakfast and then points her to the bedroom and says to Poppie, go eat in the bedroom, I don't want to see you. So everyone eats their breakfast, and then Louisa goes back into the bedroom to fetch the bowl from Poppie. When Louisa goes into the bedroom, she sees that the bed now and Poppie is completely drenched, and she gets even more furious with Poppie and she starts screaming at her and shouting at her, and then she grabs Poppie by the arm and she throws her across the room. Poppie then hits her head on a wall. She kind of stumbles up. She's obviously completely dazed by what happened. She's a 3-year-old child who's just been thrown across the room. So she's dazed. She's trying to get up. And apparently Louisa said that Poppie then walked into the wall again, and then she collapsed on the floor. Quibus then said that Louisa grabbed Poppie again, pulled her by the arm and put her into the bath, where she then hosed Poppie off. And then while Louisa was busy hosing Poppie off in the bath, Quibus then said that he went to the mall, he then went shopping, and he came back a couple minutes later. And then when he came back, he said that Poppie was busy lying by the trash bin, and she was just lying there, and he just called to Louisa and said, your daughter's playing dead again, go see what's up. Quibus then said Louisa didn't bother coming to look at Poppie, so he just left it. He continued to watch TV, and a couple hours later he then bothered to get up and go see why Poppie still hadn't moved. He then went to Poppie and he said that when he felt her, she was completely cold and her lips were blue. And that's apparently Quibus' side of the story, that it was all Louisa and that he had done nothing. So let's get to the medical professionals who actually looked at Poppie's body the night that she had been murdered. So the doctor who performed Poppie's autopsy said that she had passed away from blunt force trauma to the head. And he also said that her head was completely shaved, but it was shaved so badly that she had cuts from the razor on her scalp as well. He also said that she had such a massive knock on her head that it was almost the size of a golf ball to almost becoming a tennis ball size. And that's big for a child that is only 3 years old. He said that her forehead was so incredibly swollen and her eyes were black, and that she had 25 different bruises, from new to old bruises all over her body. And he said that when he took photos of her body post-mortem, she was a completely different child to the photos that he had seen of her before all of this happened. She was basically unrecognizable. And if we just take a step back, I find this case incredibly interesting because there were so many people that failed Poppie in the days and months leading up to her murder. You look at the priests, the teachers, the social workers, the police force. All of these people who were around Poppie knew exactly what was happening. And you can't say, oh, maybe they assumed. Poppie literally went to her teacher with black eyes and bruises, and the teacher would ask, how did you get these bruises? And Poppie would say, my mom hit me, Quibus hit me, something happened, and the teacher would just note it down but never take it anywhere further. And this case kind of reminds me of the Kitty Genovese case that we covered a long time ago, a couple months ago, where everyone just stood by and assumed that someone else would do something. And we know this as the bystander effect if you've ever watched that video. But basically the bystander effect is where, oh, there's so many people looking at a crash, for example, and they think, oh, don't worry, that person will call the police, that one will call the ambulance, I'll just sit and wait for everyone else to do it. And you can't exactly bring up the fact that people don't want to step on parents' toes because you don't exactly tell a parent how to raise their child, but this is completely completely different. The child is coming to you saying that she's hurt, she's sore, she's traumatized, and she's hungry, and no one's ever doing anything about it. And this is blatant child abuse, and no one stepped in. So I'm sorry for that tangent. It just really upsets me about how many people failed young Poppie van der Merwe. And after the police had arrested Louisa and Kobus and they were on trial, the judge in this case actually said that all the people that were involved in Poppie's life should also be on the stand, as they were basically accomplices in this whole case because they stood by and they did nothing. And he told everyone that was involved, from the teachers, the priests, the social workers, that they had a duty to report this to authorities, and the authorities had the duty to do something to protect this young girl's life, and everyone failed her. But sadly, nothing came from that, and the people who, like teachers and priests and all that, never actually went any further. They were never charged with anything. So in trial, Louisa would actually say that Kobus would threaten her life often, and she had battered woman syndrome. And she said that Kobus would constantly threaten her life and say, if you ever say something to authorities, I will kill you. If you go and say something about what I did to Poppie or Jaco, I will kill you. And Louisa believed this, and she said that she would walk around the house and see what Kobus was doing to Poppie or Jaco, and she would just leave it because she thought that if she didn't get involved and didn't have anything to say to Kobus, that the punishment that he was enforcing on Poppie or Jaco would be less. So in the end, Kobus and Louisa pleaded not guilty to the charges that were put on them, and they were charges such as murder and assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm.
Wie wil draai?
No bail. But in the end, Kobus and Louisa Kokomoer were both found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, and in South Africa life is only 25 years. But with the 25-year sentence, they were also given an extra 10 years each for abuse. And as a side note, Poppie's brother Jaco was placed with relatives, and I do hope that wherever he is and whoever he's with gives him a safe, healthy, and happy home. And to end this case, do I think the sentencing for Kobus and Louisa is enough? Definitely not. But at least, and we hope that they will be serving 25 years behind bars. Do I think they will serve their entire 35-year sentence? I don't think so, as we know a lot of offenders do get out on good behavior in South Africa. But let's just hope they at least serve that 25 years. But this case is so sad because of the amount of people that failed Poppie. And we mean right from the beginning of her life. She had an incredibly short 3 years, and those 3 years were spent mostly being terrified of the people who were there and were supposed to love her. But that is the case of Poppie van der Merwe. Let me know what you think down below. I hope you're all staying safe. I do just want to say thank you for all your kind messages, your support. You're all very, very kind. Thank you very much. But I hope you all have a great and safe day further. Don't talk to strangers, and I'll see you again next week. Bye.